Hi there. So I want to take on a little bit of a different tone with the next elephant that I want to expose today. So if you've missed the last few videos, what we're doing is we are exposing all of the elephants in the room that interfere with our ability to give and to receive the kind of support for parents, educators, and kids that really gets to the root and addresses issues over the long term. And all of the elephants, all of the 5 elephants that I've identified, need our love. But the elephant I want to expose today needs our love most of all. And this is the guilt elephant. So I was raised Catholic, so I am very well acquainted with the guilt elephant. So the guilt elephant likes to take on what he believes is the helpful disguise of the illusionist. So he often has his head in the clouds. He's usually in denial, and he works really hard to make things appear as though everything's going really well because he doesn't want to face those things that may not be going so well. And the reason he does this is because he was most likely raised with a lot of shame. And this shame has him avoiding taking personal responsibility. And this is one of the reasons why I believe it's important for us to take a really close look at the ways that we are managing kids' behaviors, because shame is actually really effective in the short term for discouraging unwanted behaviors. But over the long term, it actually has the opposite effect. And it has us avoiding personal responsibility. And I believe that there are other ways for us to encourage kids to take personal responsibility, which is really important, without using shame. So I don't have time to talk about that in this video, but if you want to know more about that, you can always reach out. So how do we recognize the illusionist? So the illusionist likes to brag about everything that is going well. So he likes to talk about how wonderful his kids are and all their accomplishments and everything that's going really well. And I'm sure that the illusionist has wonderful kids and that they are doing amazing things. And it's not necessarily that what he's telling is untrue. It's just what he neglects. He neglects to share those things that aren't going so well. But if those things that aren't going so well become apparent, you might hear him say things like, boys will be boys, girls will be girls, kids will be kids. He kind of makes light of things so that he doesn't actually have to face them. So what can we do with this guilt elephant? We really need to be extra sensitive and careful with this guilt elephant, because when the guilt elephant is faced with a truth, he may feel under personal attack, even if that truth is expressed in a very kind and gentle way. So the guilt elephant can be very defensive. So one of the best ways to approach the guilt elephant is to share some of your own shortcomings or challenges, or be willing to be vulnerable around the guilt elephant so that the guilt elephant can learn to be a little more easy on himself and to have a little bit more compassion for himself. One of the reasons that the guilt elephant creates these illusions is because he has the false notion that he's supposed to be perfect, and that if he's not perfect, then he is going to have to punish himself for those imperfections. And So it's kind of ironic that in our attempts to be perfect and our attempts to do things perfectly, that we end up going in the opposite direction. And the truth is there's not a single parent or educator out there that's got it all figured out when it comes to kids. There's so many things that make raising and educating kids extremely challenging and frankly very confusing. So this idea that we're supposed to know it all and we're supposed to be perfect in every moment is an illusion that we need to really get rid of. So the more that we can, whether it's our own guilt elephant, have compassion for ourselves. The antidote for the guilt elephant is forgiveness. So we forgive ourselves or forgive others for their shortcomings. It's not a good idea to try to shame the guilt elephant, because that's the very thing that the guilt elephant is trying to avoid. And that's often what we do, even with adults, is we try to get them to see what they're doing wrong by shaming them into looking at it, and that usually backfires. So how does this trickle down to kids? What guilt does is it has us avoiding looking at what may be unhealthy patterns in ourselves and unhealthy patterns that may be coming up in kids. And what that does is it has us avoiding getting support, because if we're trying to avoid looking at something, bringing in support will most likely force us to see those things that we don't want to see. So usually what happens is it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse, and we keep avoiding and avoiding and avoiding until it's so big that we can't deny it anymore. And then at that point, it's much harder to undo. So that is a major pitfall of the guilt elephant. The guilt elephant has a hard time apologizing. And I actually believe that one of the ways that we can help kids learn how to take responsibility for themselves, how to have self-responsibility, is by modeling that for them. We are never, ever going to get it right all the time. And we need to be self-reflective when it comes to kids. And we need to acknowledge those moments when we may have acted in a way that wasn't in their best interest. And the guilt elephant doesn't like to be self-reflective, doesn't like to admit when they may have gone too far. But if the guilt elephant can get to the point where he's willing to be self-reflective and he's willing to apologize to a child when he may have not acted in their best interest. This is where real miracles start to happen, to be honest. Kids are probably the most forgiving creatures, and they're extremely resilient. And usually when we're not making progress with a challenge that a kid is experiencing, it's usually just because we're not getting real enough with what's really going on. We're not willing to go deep enough. So if we are willing to be humbled enough to admit that we're not always right when it comes to kids, and that's hard because we've been really given this message that we need to kind of be in charge, we need to know it all, we need to be in control, we need to give the child this image of us having everything together. More we can be humbled and be willing to be vulnerable with kids and to be real with kids, that's when things really start to change. That's when the real miracles start to happen. So I hope I've given you something to think about. And I hope that you will have compassion and love for yourself and for your own guilt elephant, because we all have guilt elephants. One other thing I forgot to mention is try not to get caught up in the illusions that the guilt elephants create. Because if we all have these guilt elephants, what that means is everybody is creating this illusion that things are going much better than they may really be. In general, not just with kids, we do this in general. And then what we do is we compare ourselves to that. And then that can perpetuate this whole idea of thinking that we need to be perfect and we need to have everything together. So be careful not to get caught in that trap. So as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you need support with anything, feel free to reach out. Thanks.